Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, October 8, 2020 session in our series on digital transformation in traditional and new industries in Asia. I'm Richard Dasher. I direct the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center at Stanford. We're very happy to produce this series. This is the 27th year we have been producing series on some areas of technology business in Asia. And I'm also happy to recognize the 21 member companies you may have seen on the slides leading up to the session today that are members of the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center. All of our funding comes basically from them. And so we really appreciate their support and the support that allows us to give these programs to the public. So for today, we will have a presentation by Ms. Madhu Shalini Iyer, who is a partner with Rocketship.vc. And after Shalini gives her presentation, we do Q&A for a while. The regular formal program will close at 5:50 p.m. We'll turn off the recording then. And after that, anyone who can stay is welcome to stay to an optional informal networking session where we'll keep going with more kind of hopefully interactive and just free format. For the main part of the session today, I want to ask everyone, when you have a question, please put it in chat. I will keep my eyes open on the chat column, and we'll relay the questions to Madhu as we finish up our after she finishes her prepared remarks. This allows us to get to more questions during the time, and it's a little bit easier than having to mute and unmute people and so forth. So I'm very happy that Ms. Iyer can come and be with us. I first got to know Madhu when she came to one of our seminars a few years ago, and she soon became a speaker in our seminars. We asked her to talk about new trends among entrepreneurship community in Southeast Asia. Madhu is a native of Singapore, and she, at the time, had just finished a stint as the chief data officer of Gojek, which is this decacorn from Indonesia that started out as ride-hailing and now is really rivaling Alibaba in terms of having a diverse business model. So Madhu was on the board. She started at Singapore office. Prior to that, Madhu was an operating partner at a large private equity fund, and she was also part of the founding team of Intuit's QuickBooks lending platform. So she is a data scientist, and she has a great kind of insight into how the venture capital industry can be transformed by being data-driven. So let me turn over the floor to Madhu at this point and ask you to give us some prepared remarks. Thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you so much, Professor Dasher, for having me. And I'm excited to be in this session of yours. It's always been a pleasure to come back to your sessions, which I feel is such a integral part of who I am. The US Asia Technology Management Center really sort of defines my life and my work certainly in the past and also as I proceed in the future. So with that, I'll share my screen and hopefully everybody can hear me properly. And if there's any technical issues, we live in a different world, please let me know. So today, as Professor Dasher invited me to this session, I wanted to talk about how we are using data science to transform global venture capital. I'm a partner at Rocketship.vc, which is really a venture capital fund based out of Silicon Valley. We are headquartered in Los Altos, and I'll speak about it a little bit. But I wanted to just give you an insight into my life and my journey until now. I was born in India, raised there, did my high school in Singapore, which started a lifelong sort of association with Singapore. It's where my parents lived. It's where I started out as a young school kid. Went to university in Sydney, did engineering. Came to the US, a couple decades ago, and worked at a company called Exponent as a data scientist. And I was a senior scientist there in the statistics and data sciences practice. Exponent is a science and engineering think tank started by a bunch of Stanford alumni. So that also is sort of the Stanford story, kind of coming back here. It's got a lot of practices it's in Menlo Park, and I was in the statistics and data science practice before the data scientist word was coined. Spent a few years there and then moved to Intuit, just as the Valley was getting into sort of product analytics and building data-driven products. And I was a data scientist at Intuit, where I built I was the founding data science team member of something called QuickBooks Financing. QuickBooks Financing was this entire idea that, you have a lot of data in QuickBooks. How do you sort of use that to make sure that we can get working capital to the QuickBooks users? And QuickBooks, for people who might not know, is, the biggest accounting software for in the US for small businesses. So the idea was, at the time, 2010, 2011, fintech as an industry was just sort of coming about. You had lending, you had the entire landscape sort of developing, and digital lending certainly was one of them. We worked with Cabbage, Lending Club, and a bunch of other, alternative lenders that were coming up in addition to banks to make sure that our customers at QuickBooks got the financing that they need. And data was at the heart of it, because the entire idea was, how do you use the data in QuickBooks that people were entering and maintaining to get them the loans and the working capital that they required. That was the start of a journey. And within a couple of years, we had lent about $250 million on the platform, got a few patents. How do you sort of use data points to go away and move away from this notion of just the FICO score or the credit score experience, whatever you might have, and how do you kind of, decision based on the businesses and the performance of the business. I then got an opportunity to move back to Southeast Asia, which, was my Singapore story. And I was at a private equity fund, which was about a $150 million fund, trying to build fintech startups around Southeast Asia. At that time, 2015, 2016, startups itself, the ecosystem for startups was very nascent in Southeast Asia. And fintech, as you can imagine, was also really nascent. So the idea was I would be an operating partner to go and build these businesses from scratch for this private equity fund. Went back, worked in Singapore, Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, saw it all, loved what was going on. It was really sort of, and I have it in my later slides, entrepreneurship, outside of the Valley 1.0, and decided to go back and join Gojek because the opportunity presented itself. And I felt that it was key to sort of, see it from the landscape of the builders and the operators rather than just investing. Because at that time that was required, because there was a dearth of sort of builders, and people who were creating companies. And so I joined as the chief data officer of Gojek. I was on the board. I started the Singapore office, we grew, and by the time we had raised $550 million and had already reached a unicorn status, and it was very, very heartening to build something that truly the people of Indonesia needed. We, at the time I was there, we were able to scale to 1 million transactions per day. And this was, so Gojek, for people who are not aware, is a bike. It started as a bike sharing app, bike hailing app in Indonesia. Very quickly, it became Go Food, like the Uber Eats. So it's the Uber of Indonesia, except on bikes. We also had Go Car, so really also car, Eats, like Uber Eats, and many other things. And I was also sort of part of the team that built the GoPay ecosystem. What was really remarkable was, in the 3 days that GoPay had launched, it had more transactions than the Bank of Indonesia. That's truly what you can take away is an emerging market, how much the requirement for these services is. I came back home to Menlo Park and joined a company called Ethos Lending. Ethos Lending was again a fintech, but a prop tech company that had about a warehouse of $1.5 billion, and it was trying to automate home personal mortgages. I was a chief data officer. I helped the company raise a Series C round. It was led by Khosla Ventures. In the previous round and the next round, we got a great amount of traction and a lot of support. And I then started advising a lot of different companies here and in Southeast Asia, in India, and around the world, literally. That's when I met. I met the founding partners and the partners of Rocketship. And Rocketship was in Los Altos, but really sort of recognized this concept that entrepreneurship is global. And I know it's a smaller graph here, but I'll just talk you through it. What really I wanted you to take away from this slide is that a few years back, it was an omnipresent notion that entrepreneurship is really just Valley and a few other places in the US. But what has really become clear in the last few years, and you can see it in the rankings from 2017 even to 2020, is that entrepreneurship is really a global phenomenon now. You have Valley still at the top, but there are other cities outside the US that are catching up very quickly. And the second, and so there's a full list here which sort of encompasses the whole world. And there's a lot of new entrants here, like Tokyo, like Seoul, in Korea, like Hangzhou, like Sao Paulo in Brazil. So this is a fascinating table in itself. But as you drill down to the table on the right, the 30% of top global ecosystems really are in the Asia Pacific region, in the APAC region. And that really is remarkable. And it's a very, very short span of time that this has happened. And it's certainly, going to only continue as we see activity around the world. So, what's traditional VC and how is this different from what we are trying to do? What traditional VC is that it's very network driven. We are, we know people. There's obviously the Stanford connections here and, in San Francisco and whatnot. And you rely on your networks and you rely on what people are building. I think what it really comes down to is that it's very sort of network constrained, and it's also very location constrained. And I think what the other thing that happens, and sort of adding on to the other two is the confirmation bias. So you already have some biases, and you feel that you know what's sort of going on the ground, and you have some beliefs, and then and so you end up seeing things that you might want to basically see. For example, you might really not know what's going on in Southeast Asia, but you might sort of have certain notions about it, and those are things that you can actually run into. Also, inherent biases in terms of founder quality, founder demographics. There's a lot of confirmation bias that comes in to play. So what Rocketship.vc really is sort of built on the premises, data is really eating the world. So why not venture capital? We've heard of the Wall Street Journal running articles that the quants are running Wall Street now. You have a lot of quant making decisions there. You have driverless cars, so you are also sort of, placing your safety and your life in the hands of, these driverless vehicles, and they're here to stay. And you have a bunch of other things that are coming up, which, it's sort of pervasive. It's all pervasive, and I don't want to read everything here, but, we all know that AI and data is here to stay. So the question really is that in an ecosystem like the startup ecosystem, which venture capital is a part of, why is it that data is sort of, used as almost, a supplementary, afterthought after you've sort of gone through your network biases and so on and so forth? Which is why we decided that, we were going to be doing this in a different way. So Rocketship.vc is a global VC that's really powered by data. And I'll get into it, in a bit, what I mean by that. But what I mean by that is that we curate our deal flow using data and machine learning models. And we're able to do that because the fact that we have a very large database that we have curated, that we also very, very diligently maintain. We collect it, we cull it, we impute on it. We put a lot of thought into the data that we have assembled, and then we are building models on top of it to make sure that we can evaluate the most promising global startups. And global because, at the time when you have an entire, world's database at your hands and disposal, then location is not a constraint anymore. And we do these investments because of our partners with, broad expertise, which we're all sort of data scientists, and I'll speak about that in a minute. And we perform a lot of deep evaluation. So we are able to evaluate these startups from anywhere in the world, which in our case, it's the Valley sitting here. And we are huge value adds to these startups, as we have seen since the inception. We're all data scientists. We're all sort of operators as well. And we do have a very large database, which we can compare companies to their, in their cohorts, in their geographies, in their verticals, and we are able to sort of give them insights about their business before they get insight, from even their local sort of, know-how and other networks and other such things. So I will speak a little bit about this team that you're seeing. It's an entire snapshot of Rocketship. It was started in 2014. You have the founding partners here, Anand Rajaraman, Venki Harinarayan, and Sailesh Ramakrishnan. The three of them really sort of came together in 2014. And, Anand and Venki are Stanford alumni. I have to give a special mention here that, we as a fund feel very close to Stanford. Both Anand and Venki did their PhD in computer science from Stanford, graduated and started a company called Jungly out of the campus of Stanford, really. And Jungly was acquired by Amazon in 1998, when Amazon was still a bookseller. Venki and Anand very quickly sort of added values, thought of, it to be a third-party marketplace, which, most of Amazon's business today is that. And they're also the inventors of the Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is used even to this day. Anand actually still teaches data mining at Stanford, so he's part of the faculty. They then started a fund called Cambrian in 2000, and Cambrian had Jeff Bezos as one of the largest investors, LPs. This was really on the idea that people coming out of schools founders, how do you get them help and so on and so forth, and beyond that. But it was also sort of built on the premise that there is a need for deep tech startups, and this was in 2000. That was a top 5% performing fund for its vintage. They came out and started a company called Cosmics, which is where they met our other partner, Sailesh Ramakrishnan, who joined them from NASA. And he also had, pursued a PhD in computer science from Michigan. So all of them built Cosmics, sold it to Walmart. Venki actually named the acquisition and the department, he named it Walmart Labs. So Cosmics became Walmart Labs, and Walmart Labs has about 7,500 employees today. During this time, Venki and Anand are also, how this happened is a very long story, but it also has a common thread at Stanford. Venki and Anand ended up investing in a Series A in a person called Mark Zuckerberg, who built Facebook. So they're Series A investors in Facebook. They're invested in Lyft, in Efficient Frontier, and a bunch of other startups around the valley. And in 2014, they decided to come out, and start Rocketship. And the entire premise was around the fact that they had used data to build data-driven products, and and had these amazing exits that they were able to sort of provide value to the largest e-commerce giants. So the premise was, why can't we use data to disrupt deal flow and to analyze the startups and invest in startups before other people sort of find the patterns and whatnot. So that's how they thought of collecting this huge amounts of raw data, new data sets that we ingest. There's a ton of features that we build on them, and we then build algorithms, and from those algorithms and screens come out strategies. And from those strategies, we make these investments. And one thing is clear, that there is no such thing as just the valley, just a certain set of founders, nothing. This is completely agnostic. And what goes into these 48 terabytes of raw data is what comes out somehow in our investments, which is as neutral and as agnostic as the entire process of sort of coming to a conclusion on what we find are interesting and extremely, great performing startups. So the investment process that we have is that we have multiple partner conversations. And one of the things that, I want to note here is that my journey into Rocketship, and I was, and I kind of paused there and came back to Rocketship, was that I met the partners when I was looking at startups after I came back to the US. I met them when I was evaluating deals in Southeast Asia and LATAM. We got to speaking, and there were a few things that became very clear. We were all globally minded. We all lived in the valley, so we obviously were interested in our own backyard. We all had built companies. We were operators of very large companies. And what also became clear was that we all had a very special interest and background in data. So it was sort of a win-win situation to be joining this incredible team of truly, of class, of a world-class investor team. So we were doing Zoom way before the pandemic hit. In fact, most of our investments were made out of conversations without ever seeing the founder, and on Zoom and Whereby and many other sort of different tools that were used for online meeting. And whenever I think of Zoom, I have to sort of have a special call out here for Professor Dasher as well. He had invited me to a Japanese, I think it was a meeting run by you, and the founder of Zoom had come, Eric had come, and right. This was last summer, and we couldn't have imagined then. And I know you and I and him had chatted for a while, and I could never have imagined that Zoom would be such a centerpiece of our existence today. almost like WhatsApp. Yeah, so Rocketship's been using Zoom and other meeting spots to invest way before the pandemic hit.
Madhu, if I can interrupt you for just a brief second. This was the Japan-US Innovation Awards, and we gave the Emerging Leader Award for the United States to Zoom back in summer of 2019. So little did we know that even though this company had just gone public and it was looking really good, that it would explode like it has in the last 8 months.
I know, and what an amazing, I know. And so, I always joke that if Professor Dasher picks somebody out, for an innovation award, watch out for that company in the next year.
Our award this year went to Beyond Meat. I'll be public and say that.
Fantastic. But yeah, so we've really taken a new look at, how do we invest, and do you really sort of meet people and look them in the eye and invest in whatnot. We obviously have multiple partner conversations. We talk to the company. One of the things that I will note is that a public investing model is very different to a private company investing model, because the data, what's going on inside a company. With us, we have to speak to the company in order to really know what the metrics are and find out how the company is doing, because this is not public information. So that's why I wanted to annotate the multiple partner conversations, how important it is. And then beyond that, we do deep due diligence, customer conversations, competitive analysis with all the data that we have. And then we have investment committee meetings, and the process is pretty standard after that. So I want to just briefly speak about, the operations of Rocketship in motion with a case study with an entire country of India. One of the coolest things that we got to do at Rocketship, was to really have sort of a courtside seat to the amazing trends and waves of innovation that were happening across the world in India. We really were sort of, in these slides, I'll try to summarize the waves that we saw that happened in India that made the country one of the hottest spots for investment in the last decade. So as I go into this, I'll speak about the, in late 2016, our CRM system, the pipeline, what our algos were picking up, it was a pipeline full of Indian companies, and we weren't sure what was going on. And this graph shows you the number of mobile subscribers in India from 2010 onwards. And in 2016, there was a huge bump and a jump that happened, and it was really between June 2016 and December 2016. And it was due to the launch of the Indian telecom company Reliance Jio in September of 2016. So what Jio brought was, it brought 100 million new subscribers, 100 million, just to reiterate that number, within 6 months. And it was mainly due to their offer of cheap data plans. Before, it was in tier 1 and tier 2 cities, tier 1 cities mostly, but this now expanded to tier 2 cities, tier 3. It became, a cheap commodity for everybody. And most of these subscribers were smartphone users who really gobbled up all of this data. And this really led to the first wave, which, get into the next slide, which I call the communication, content, and commerce wave. When we first saw this, and I'm obviously mouthing some of my partners' surprise, they were really from afar, from sitting in the valley, they were really surprised, and they couldn't really pinpoint why this uptick was happening. They began to see, with the cheapest data that was available now, and subscribers were being able to, communicate with anybody they wanted to. We saw a massive growth of platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram, and Facebook. And in fact, India became one of the largest user base for WhatsApp around then.
Madhu, if you don't mind, would you tell people what MAU stands for?
Yeah, monthly active users. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
This is, and I was going to go into this. Yeah, so the monthly active users, of the top 3 Cs apps in India, and this is a chart that just shows a huge bump. And so around content, around communication, and around commerce. We began to see, so once these users started communicating, there was a demand for content sharing. And meanwhile, businesses noticed that their consumers were spending a lot of time on these platforms, and hence started boosting their presence there as well. And this really led to the development of online commerce opportunities, and online retail really took off in India. And this obviously then, once retail takes off and commerce takes off, then, you have the follow-up of, you have the follow-up of payments and whatnot. And so, we saw that as well, which I'll speak to next. I think what really happened for our investment models were we were able to find companies like Duta, which was a news sharing app on WhatsApp. Find, which was really helping commerce and retail in fashion, and it was an AI app. And Moglix, which is a B2B commerce app. And we invested in all of these companies. And then, as I said, as commerce began, we also saw the Paytms of the world and the phone pays and the different apps for transfer of money and enabling sort of, digital payments that just really took off in India. And so here on these charts, you'll see the yearly digital payment transaction values in India, which, saw huge growth, and the total monthly active users of the different payment apps in millions. And, as you can see between, it's really just a huge takeoff. And we invested in a company called PaySense, which got acquired by Naspers PayU. So we've, also just wanted to sort of highlight the trends, but also tell you how we started investing in India and the companies that we ended up investing in. And as this first wave picked up steam, not only did it grow deeper, but it also started having an impact on other related businesses, which then constituted a second wave. And this wave included online access to expanding to a wider range of goods and services. And the most that benefited was mobility, which, and financial services too. And I won't talk about mobility much because I really wanted to show you Southeast Asia and whatnot. But what I will talk to you more about is the food, clothing, and shelter apps that we started seeing. And of course the money, which I talked about. But we saw a lot of activity. Once the customers were comfortable with payments, with logistics, with supply chains and whatnot moving, they started the focus started shifting to purchasing of essentials online, which online, and the food, clothing, and shelter app really is online ordering and delivery of goods. That sparked towards online ordering and services at home. And services range from plumbing and electricians to personal care and so on and so forth. And we then invested in Locus, which is a logistics enabler, Mad Street Den, and a few others, following the 3 Cs wave for better logistics and commerce. And finally, as we got into COVID, some of the trends that we really saw with COVID was digital health, which should come as no surprise to anybody here. Telemedicine, and even in the US, I could never have imagined that getting an online appointment with doctors would be so easy. And this just as we saw the entire compliance and all of those things have really shifted, and they have actually shifted even faster in the emerging markets. Fascinatingly, they've always been ahead because it's more phone powered and it's a different sort of behavior of consumers. But digital health really took off, and we're speaking to quite a few companies in digital health. I think a point that I want to note is that I use India as a example. But what we have seen is that we are seeing this. India and China are used as examples in Southeast Asia. China, especially in Southeast Asia, and also in LATAM. So these trends are they mimic very closely in LATAM and in Southeast Asia, and Europe to an extent as well, but Southeast Asia and LATAM for sure. And what also happened with COVID was, what had already started, which is the EdTech trend. Everybody now is online, education is huge, and we saw huge movements. I'm actually just showing you the active users of Byju's, Topper, and Vedantu, which are the biggest online ed plays in India. But there's just so many others that have emerged in India, in Southeast Asia, and LATAM, especially due to COVID, and they've all seen COVID tailwinds. And we also sort of noticed that in India very, very quickly, very, very at the very beginning of COVID. So with that, and we are really investing and a lot of energy into finding out these trends. What is to be noted is that we invest in B2B, B2C, and deep tech plays. The key advantage of seeing these trends is that we are identifying them bottom up from the data. They don't really, I can never say that there's never any bias in the physical world, as even introduced by raw data sets, but we try to reduce bias as much as possible. It increases our confidence, because if you are forming deal flow through companies that you're seeing out of your screens and your data, you want to be sure. And like I said, this is not like public markets. This is, we don't really know much about the company, but directionality and a strong confidence in the directionality of the company is very important. And we've seen time and time again that we are able to get very confident quickly, just because of the number of companies that we've spoken to, and the quality that we have measured, and the quality has been very consistent since 2014. And I'd say about, the first few, years we took in building the data, and as we have become more, as we've sort of become a little bit more complex with our data collection, nuanced, as we've had more experience, as we've had more back testing, it's becoming more and more robust. So, we identify leading companies, and we do competitive analysis. We pick up the recognized leaders. Sometimes we also don't pick up the leaders, and, there are companies that not many people know about, and, and we've been able to sort of pinpoint these unrecognized leaders, emerging leaders, before even, people on the ground have been able to identify it. So that goes back to my first slide of removing objective bias. And we reach out to these companies. We bypass this entire the notion of traditional networks. And we're building models that we're able to reach out to companies as they're raising their rounds. And there is obviously a lot of science and art to these models, but we pride ourselves at the timeliness of our outreach to these founders, just as they're raising their next rounds and whatnot. So the timing is, is a huge key factor as well. With that, I'll share a little bit about of our portfolio, which is very global in nature. And you can find this on www.Rocketship.vc, which is our website. What I think, I'm very sort of proud of in this portfolio is that we don't have any satellite offices. We are completely we are sitting in Los Altos. And we've not made any trips anywhere. We have a company in Brazil called Trocofone. We are speaking to a ton of companies in Southeast Asia. We have one from Hong Kong. We have a lot of companies in New York and of course San Francisco, the Valley, and we also have companies in India and Europe. And it's in, there are B2B companies here, B2C companies here, a couple of deep tech companies, but it's a portfolio that has been largely, most of the portfolio is identified from our data, which is the reason I wanted to sort of tell you that, this is a culmination of all of the previous slides. All of these 45 or so investments have been made through the data-driven approach that I told you about, comes from the raw data sets, from the algorithms, comes from having Zoom conversations with these founders, with multiple partners, comes from building confidence on these companies without ever seeing their facilities or meeting the founders face to face many a times, but comes from doing due diligence that I had spoken about earlier. And it really comes from having identified them from, an absolutely agnostic way that we've sort of formed these data sets from. So with that, I will say about Rocketship that we're very founder friendly and we're very focused. We ourselves are experienced founders. We've got a world-class data science team in the team photograph that I showed you earlier. Some of the best minds from around the valley, and many of them from Stanford. So Stanford's a very, very close connection to us. And we have the largest database of startup activity. And we truly are, we are founders. We understand, we know how to scale from a 0 to 10 million in revenue, but also from the 10 million to 100 million in revenue. And I sort of leave the last slide with, we are certainly very, very open to inbounds. We always go back and triangulate. And there are different stages that that are in a startup's life. It's very early stage when you might not even be in any data set anywhere in the world. So we want to hear from you. We feel that getting you in our database and tracking you and meeting with founders only makes us better investors and better data scientists. And if you're not there yet, and if you want to come out and find out how to, how we are building this magic that we think is magic, come and intern with us. And, we'd love to hear from you for internships and so on and so forth. Yeah, with that, I'll, that's it.
Madhu, thank you. That's great. Those are great opening comments. We've got several questions to kind of push things a little bit forward before we get to questions from the audience. I think a lot of people have this feeling that, the venture capitalists sit in their office and they have thousands of business plans coming to them all the time. And so they don't have to go out and do market research. They just look for the business plans and kind of put those in context. What percentage would you say are companies that you used your ML to find without having somebody contact you versus what percentage are people that bring you a new idea and you look into it and say, wow, that is a good trend?
Yeah. So I think most of our, and if I understood your question, what percentage of our portfolio is, what we found and what percentage is inbounds. Most of our portfolio is actually, companies that we've found through our algorithms at the moment.
Through the algorithms. Okay.
But we have invested, and I don't have the exact number right now, but we have invested in inbounds for sure.
So in your India case study, you showed that you were looking at market trends, and then you would dig down into the market trends and see who's doing what in those market trends. But since you're using machine learning as the basis for really identifying companies, how do you avoid the bias of previous decisions that have been made by investors or previous kinds of performance that could be built into the ML data?
No, absolutely. I think that's a great question. We have, when I say we have these screens that show up these companies, we have tons of companies that make our multiple screens every day that we push and that we evaluate. There are a few. There is an answer to this. It's a multiple answer. It's multiple answers. One is that we obviously are evaluating hundreds of companies in order to make that one investment decision that we do. And so we are looking at many, and there is that bias, a human bias that is introduced. So it is a human interaction as well afterwards. And it's sort of talking to the competitive, to the customers, doing a competitive analysis, and the things that you have just said do show up in that. And so we cannot sort of unsee some of the things that we've seen that other investors have made in a space. which we think, is, has failed due to some reason. And I'll give you an example of that. Uh, we did see that, when you build something on a platform and you don't have a direct relationship with customers, that's a very difficult, and that's a very difficult dance, because you don't own your customers. And so we have actually sometimes done a little bit more analysis, post analysis, after something shows up, and we've walked away from that. So you are very right in saying that, we are not completely just machine driven. There is a mix of machine and sort of human experiences after that.
Well, and it's the difference between an automated trade decision and really using a very powerful tool to make a human-driven decision.
Absolutely.
So I think that a lot of the really best uses of AI are to give people better tools. Absolutely. Rather than to try to do things instead of having the people do them. Yeah. In that regard, though, there are all kinds of, different stages of companies have different stages of data. At the pre-seed stage, you have no insight into what the market is going to do for a company yet.
Yep.
You really don't know much anything except the founders of the company and their backgrounds. Yes. And then as you go along, you have other kinds of data you can rely on. Are you agnostic about what stage company do you invest in?
And an excellent question and a remark. We are looking at seed, beyond seed, Series A and Series B, which is where the inbounds come in, which is my last request. Is when I had said inbounds, we cannot know founders that are not in, or companies that are not in a startup database. And that is something which we recognize. Which is why we like to talk to founders, especially in deep technology, as they're building things. B2B, very early, just founders, just an idea, which we recognize as sort of an area where we want to have as many inbounds as possible. But yeah, I mean, I think it's various stages, and we invest in slightly later stages. But we will make exceptions for great things and for great plays, especially deep technology, which we have experience in. Yeah.
But especially in regard to deep tech, I like the way you said B2B, B2C, and deep tech, because really the deeper the technology, and most of the time it's further away from the market.
Absolutely.
And so it's less going to be revealed in market trends.
Absolutely.
How do you deal with deep tech in this?
So deep technology also makes it to our screens. It's always, cohort analysis, similar lookalike analyses that we see companies that are doing well, and if they're sort of building something, that has use cases that has use cases, we will find them. But it is in later stages that we will find them. And some of the deep tech companies are built in a vacuum by founders, and you need a lot of money to go out and whatnot. And so, and in the pre-seed stage, especially, which is why, we are lucky because we have the Stanford network. Our founding partners are from Stanford. Many of the data scientists and the team that we have, other partners as well, are from Stanford. So, we have the Stanford network, and we have others to go to see what's going on around the valley. But there are gaps, and we are certainly acknowledging of that, and we want to continuously improve and continuously talk to people. Therefore,
okay,
without it being the centerpiece of our investment thesis, I think we still are going to be very data reliant. We still are going to be very agnostic. We still are going to very heavily depend on companies that show up on our screens. We're never going to walk away from that. But if there are world-changing companies that we can leverage and build on, we will do that.
So to put this in context, when I was putting together the overview talk for this series, I pointed out that digital transformation in Asia is really being driven by consumer-facing businesses.
Yes.
And really, the B2B world kind of has to keep up with what the consumer-facing businesses are doing. Does that mean that I didn't really do an analysis of the 45 or so items in your portfolio?
Yeah.
Do you think is Rocketship looking more at B2C than they are at B2B, or does it matter?
So it is so driven by data that I think that it would be unfair to put more emphasis on one versus the other, because we truly are agnostic, even in the verticals that we
Okay.
To give you an example, when COVID occurred, which was in March, what we were immediately able to see were global trends in consumer-facing companies. You saw a huge digital health bump. You saw a huge online education bump. Commerce, of course, anything that enables people sitting at home and ordering, dinners and lunches and and payments and and fintech and all of that boomed, and that's mostly consumer-facing.
Yeah.
But what was immediately not obvious was the B2Bs that really did well because of this, which we've actually invested in. Is how do you now do reference checks, and how do you sort of how do you do HR and interviews, and how does hiring happen, and how are you solving companies' problems of of sort of doing these reference checks when people are not available. The world has changed. There's also the cloud and cloud collaboration and cloud storage and a whole bunch of other collaboration software that came up. Other non-obvious ones, like I said, the HR tech was a non-obvious one. So we've certainly seen quite a few B2Bs as well as tailwinds of COVID.
Okay.
Which is why our pipeline sort of been a mixture of both B2B and B2C.
Quick question about the fund. Do you take positions on boards? Do you lead investments, or are you always co-investing with somebody else?
Yeah, so we have led investments. We are becoming more and more bullish on leading investments when we feel that it's the right company for us. We will take board positions. We have board positions. We are very flexible, but yet sort of laser focused on companies that we think have a chance. And we believe in every company that we invest in, obviously, but we are flexible. But we are getting bullish on leading, and we'll see how that pans out.
Okay, so if Rocketship has been around since about 2014, you're getting to the point where you may have had a few liquidity events.
Yes.
Have you got some good stories?
So we, and I'm very new to the fund. I've been there for about a year. Our first fund, which was a $40 million fund, is seeing some very exciting activity that, I'm not sure whether I can speak about publicly or not, but we certainly are seeing...
Only after the exit.
Exactly. So we are seeing a lot of activity which is close. We've had some, we've seen some good acquisitions that have happened by larger groups. Lots of late. We invested early, and the company has gone on to raise a lot more money in later stages, and so the valuations have increased. So we have actually seen the goodness of many of the things, but we are waiting for our exits, which I think are very imminent. So
okay.
Yeah.
No, that's a very good answer at that stage of where the fund is, where the company is. I'm kind of curious what you're seeing in regard to the situation in kind of COVID world. How do you see that impacting? You mentioned that, of course, a lot of healthcare companies and that sort of things have come up. Are you seeing any other impact on the VC industry?
So what was really I think everybody, when COVID hit, from the first 2 to 3 months were one of shock and processing with a different world, and in sort of a different operational world. VC is a industry where there's a lot of meetings and in-person meetings, and going to to startups, and startups coming to VC offices. That changed overnight, and I think a lot of my colleagues, VC colleagues, were looking to us to say, how in hell do you guys take Zoom meetings and invest in companies? Tell us, because this is a new world. And we also got comments about, how can you not look at a founder's eye and see whether this is a money transaction? There has to be trust, and how do you build trust over a video conference? And we were not very affected by it, but it changed the world. It changed VC as we saw it. But people coped very quickly, very well. I think there was also a notion of, how do we make sure that companies that we have put money in already and have invested in, how do they sort of, see through this entire phase? So, they were making sure that their own portfolios and their own investments were, well funded. And so the first few months were all about sort of making sure that the invested companies, your portfolio was liquid, had a lot of liquidity.
Yeah, it is a really interesting question, because I remember a VC telling me once that the reason it's such a locally focused industry is that you really want to drive by and see what kind of office they're renting and how many cars there are in the parking lot. Because if the cars are in the parking lot, they're not out selling.
Totally, and exactly. And so that was a anecdotal, data, right. So things changed, and what we thought would take a longer time to recover, actually, right after the first couple months or 3 months, VCs were back to investing. It was actually a really, really very busy quarter. And it certainly has been, a lot of investments, a lot of activity.
The Q3 PricewaterhouseCoopers money tree just came out this week, and the blip is very small for COVID. VC is really continuing.
Absolutely. And so the small blip was right in the beginning, and things have just sort of continued on. The US election might be more of a question mark than even COVID, I feel, for the VC world. But we'll see. And as the VC world sort of is all pervasive, as is the startup ecosystem, it's more testament to them and that ecosystem. So looking forward.
Madhu, I'm going to ask you a really tough question. These days, artificial intelligence is becoming an almost obligatory advertising word. Everybody says they're using AI.
Yeah.
So how do you distinguish what you're doing from really what other funds are doing? Or do you think the other funds are going to start doing what Rocketship is doing?
I think that's an excellent question. I think there's a lot of data-driven funds that have come up or say they're doing data-driven investing. We've certainly seen those. And we certainly recognize that everybody is trying to use data to get an edge. I think, we've seen a lot of activity around, using trends data and whatnot, which I showed you. But the way we are curating our deal flow, which is completely data-driven, is a huge differentiator for us. And we have a budget, that's baked in. That's all about building models and so on and so forth to curate this. We have a team of engineers and data scientists that are looking at data. And so I'm talking about our operations more than our differentiators, but those operations are sort of our differentiators as well, that we put in a lot of effort into sort of making sure that our data and pipelines and algos, we have an engineering meeting every week of data scientists, that's how much effort that we're putting in. And a deal flow that's completely driven by your algorithms is very different to most VCs, I believe. And this is certainly a hot field, and there's different kinds of data sets that are becoming available, and people are putting money into right now. We've definitely seen Square and other people sort of saying that we're going to be, changing the way VCs are thought of, with your spend and whatnot. And we are excited because any competition, any sort of entries into this is it is recognizing, first of all, that even private startups, are sort of now going to be evaluated through a data lens. And the more funds there are like this, the more it's actually just going to be a lot more interesting for us. And
if you'll allow me, I'll make a prediction, because I think that what we're seeing is not really the loss of people being replaced by machines, which again goes way back to the first question, but instead you're going to see the truly excellent data scientists using their skills in data science in order to do investment.
Right.
Whereas there's going to be a lot of people trying to use programs and algorithms, and the old 20/80 rule is probably going to apply. So that really, 80% of the people are not getting much for their investment in the technology.
Yeah. And yeah.
So that, to kind of answer your question for you, it really will come down to the people over the long run.
Absolutely.
But it's a new set of skills that the people have, new way of looking at things, new tools that people are using. I have a question from the audience about how to look at Southeast Asia, because India and China are arguably individual countries, although I know economists in both who say that you really should look more at a state level rather than a national level.
Yes.
And across Southeast Asia, you have a huge diversity of countries. Do you find Southeast Asia-wide data useful, or are you looking really more individual country by country?
That's an excellent point. And I'll say this: Southeast Asia is 600 million people, and people think of it as a homogeneous region, but it's really not. The Philippines is completely different to Malaysia. It's completely different to Thailand. It's completely different to Indonesia, Singapore. Vietnam is very different. So these are very different, countries. And to look at it homogeneously is, it is problematic. But the trends that we see, very funnily, are actually, there are some major trends in India that we've been able to pick up. And I'll compare this back to India, and I'll certainly say this about India because I use the case study, is that Indian tier 1 cities, where there's more sort of population that's more digitally aware, more, computer people, your TCSs of the world and Infosys of the world. It's very different to tier 2 cities, which is much more vernacular, sensitive. And there are different languages in India, and so the South is very different to the East. So it's also not homogeneous at all, the tier 1 versus the tier 2 cities. But what we've been able to see with both B2B companies and B2C companies, trends are pervasive and they emerge bottom up. For example, a commerce trend, and now people going from sort of a just a regular commerce to sort of a wholesale commerce. The trends that stick in India, tier 2, tier 3 cities is the same trend. Even vernacular, how do you translate sort of vernacular scripts to make sure that these people can do things? I really think that even Southeast Asia, that's a bottom up approach where trends do emerge and persist. For example, the commerce trends, for example, a fintech trend of payments and neobanks. Philippines is very different, and its GDP is, sort of very differently, it's just in a different position to, say, Indonesia. But the trends in fintech and money movement and money transfers, even though sort of the applications are different, but the trends are persistent at the top of fintech trend, for example, of a lending trend, for example, of money transfer and exchange, for example. So, we're able to sort of find a lot of goodness in the data.
Okay. And I can imagine, and again, this is not a decision you make on one pass through the information processing. You do follow up with a lot of discussions,
Totally.
a lot of Zoom calls, and further due diligence.
Absolutely.
So I have a question from someone really that's kind of different from an investing question. This is really sort of a Stanford community question. What are the best ways for people here to take advantage of cross-border technology business opportunities with this exciting situation in Asia?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I've seen with the invent of, the ecosystem maturity in Southeast Asia and Asia as a whole, there is a lot of, there's a lot of presence here in the Valley of different communities. For example, there's Singapore EDB, Economic Development Board communities here, the Singapore Global Network. They are, constantly, looking for great candidates to move back home and found companies, or join startups. They are constantly bringing to bear, people that can sort of, help from here, be it AI or anything, so there's just a lot more cross-border pollination, in terms of sort of agency representation, in terms of innovation hubs that are coming up. The world is truly becoming, a centralized place. But more so than that, I think there's a lot of opportunity to, in this global world, I think there's just a lot of opportunity to take back, work at different places, being here. But I think, broadly, I think there's different companies that you can work with that have outposts here from Asia. I know that Grab, which is Singapore's and Indonesia's biggest competitor to Gojek, has an office in Seattle, has expanded to San Francisco. Gojek has been wanting to establish offices here. So you can work in companies there and make a difference from here, or you can go back there and make a difference in, here. And I know a lot of Indian B2B companies and also Southeast Asian companies that want to expand into markets here. So Find, which was our investment, in the retail AI space, fashion space, has a lot of customers in the US sitting in India. They have Macy's and whatnot. So truly, companies are not just built for Asia anymore. They are built for Asia and, the Western world and the US, and companies that are built there are also getting outposts here to like leverage talent here.
Yeah. Madhu, I have to ask you, some of this kind of decision bias that comes along, venture capital has been an area in which there have not been very many women partners in Silicon Valley venture funds. In dealing with all of these countries across Asia, you're also dealing with a lot of cultures in which the, let's say, the position of women is not quite as equal as it should be. Have you had to deal with that? And if so, how do you deal with it? How do you get people to respect you?
Yeah, I think, I was it's an unusual career. I was a data scientist, and then a chief data officer, was on the board. There are not many women who are engineering or data leaders. That is a little bit of an anomaly. And it's not an anomaly in the classic sense of they're not doing it, but it's, fewer women, I should say. Fewer women representatives in those positions, and in venture capital too. I think it's getting much, much better. There's a lot of LPs that are women and VCs that are women. But I would sort of be amiss not to acknowledge that there are not too many women, in the technology industry as a whole.
Are you paying special attention to startups that may have founders who are women?
So I think that one of the reasons I'm so excited by something that's truly agnostic, and it's surfaced bottom up, is that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it is a woman founder or a male founder until it makes my screens, and until I open it up and I realize it's a Rita versus a Rick. I just don't know. And so that's a very, very it's sort of very gratifying that
Yeah.
screens are so agnostic. I also will say that even beyond the women question, in Southeast Asia, especially if there's audience, or Japan or South, or Korea, uh, there was a trend that, hey, if you've studied in the Ivy Leagues in the US and you go back and you're a founder, then the chances of your company succeeding are much higher. Our data has consistently found companies that are not founders from those from Ivy Leagues or US returnees. They just people who studied in local universities in Indonesia, for example, or Korea. There are sort of founding some amazing companies. That's also gratifying to
Mm-hmm.
see. We just have sort of tried and removed all of those biases from the way we evaluate startups.
So I remember when we were talking about the title for this program, one of the suggestions was talking about democratizing venture capital.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
And
democratizing
yeah,
access.
that's a very good description of how that works.
Right. Yeah, it truly is democratizing access. I've been very lucky. I was a chief data officer of Indonesia. And I was, going, of not Indonesia, the country, but Gojek, apologies. And I used to spend time in a week, I used to be in Jakarta, in Singapore, where I built the offices, and in India, where our biggest tech team was. It was a large tech team, very diverse, populations, and I certainly have faced challenges, in my life. Um, but I think the glass ceiling is meant to be broken, and we'll see what happens, and how life pans.
Okay. I want to ask you to put up that last slide again that has the kind of inbound at Rocketship.vc on it, because we had a request from somebody in the audience about how to get in touch with you. So I think that's probably the very best way.
And we read all our emails. Inbound is definitely monitored by staff.
It's inbound. Yeah.
Yeah, and we take it seriously. Yeah.
So, yeah, I hope it's not too noisy where I am. I was getting a phone call coming in. Anyway, I think that we can probably call an end to the formal part of the program about this point. And there are a couple of things that are more appropriate for the informal discussion afterward. So let me suggest that we call an end to the recording at this point and move our informal discussion. Thanks very much, Madhu. This was a great presentation today.
Thank you so much for having me, all of you. It's always a pleasure.